We have a special one today. So I'm joined by long-term collaborator, Alexandra Vilvoskaya, you may call her Vilja, background in tango, trauma work, started in body facilitated course Moscow, now based in Tel Aviv, a very, very dear friend of mine. And in the tradition of kind of like wise Jewish intelligentsia, with much better style than me. So notice I have a microwave and dirty t-shirt, and she's dressed in her normal, elegant way in her minimalist apartment. This is pretty typical. We love each other and work together a lot. So, Vilja, anything you want to add?
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here and meet you.
We're sort of like the most romantic platonic couple in the world, is how I think of us, Vilja. So we've been collaborating and thinking together for many years. Today's session's on the philosophy of the body. Yes, I think recorded already. Great. So we're going to have you kind of conversationally kind of geek out. Feel free to ask questions later. So we'll kind of put those on pause, but do make a note. And if we say a name you don't understand, or, you can't understand either of our accents, just say for those who are listening. For those watching on YouTube, feel free to do the same in the comments in the future where you're all wearing spandex or something else. So starting point, why might anyone interested in the body, whether it be through, embodied coaching, yoga, weightlifting, sports, why might they have any interest in philosophy, Vilja? Surely that sounds like philosophy is the opposite of the body, right? This is some mental gymnastics, some mental masturbation, has nothing to do with the body or anything practical. So yeah, what's your opener there, Vilja?
I think that it's not too important what we do. We do coaching, or we go to gym, or we just meet some people and relate to them. In any action or in any moment of our life, we have some thoughts in our mind, like how do I think about human beings? How do I think about other people? How do I think about myself? And philosophy, or what we can call philosophy, is not only some great ideas, it's some way of thinking about people, about body, about embodiment, about the role of embodiment in our personal life, in our social life. So that's why I feel that knowing some ideas or some structures or some names may be quite useful, because this aha moment when you listen to some cool guy who talk about philosophy, or you read some clever book, and this, oh, I think like that, I feel the same, I'm sure in the same things. So we can share this idea, and we can feel more strong, in fact.
Yeah. Lovely. So, I mean, we have a philosophy, whether we know what it is or not. Like, I was teaching a group here in Slovenia just a few days ago, and I said, you guys are all Christian, Neoplatonic, semi-pagan rationalists in a postmodern age. And they all went, oh? But if I explain what each of those things meant, like the way in which they're Christian, even if they're not by faith, they're Christian by thinking, because that's just in Western philosophy, and they're Platonic because the Christian philosophers were Neoplatonist, and there's pagan roots in many Western countries, that still influence us, and we're modernist, and in that way we're liberal, and that means a certain thing philosophically as well as politically. And we're postmodern, and that means a certain thing philosophically, as well as, in terms of, like, I don't know, what is postmodern movies and things like that. And all those things are influencing people on how they approach anything. Like, there's a weightlifting guy we have on the channel, Mike Israetel, who's kind of got the biggest weightlifting channel on YouTube. Really funny guy, really cool guy. And his Jewishness is apparent in his thinking, and his Western American rationality is apparent in his thinking. And he's actually one who's cognizant of it, and he approaches weightlifting in a super rational way. Because what you hear in weightlifting is, bro, you should do this, bro, you should do that. They call it bro science. And then there's people who do actual science, right? And then there's people who go, well, actually, science is actually not the only thing. That's actually coming from a philosophy. So we're all coming from a philosophy. In coaching, we talk a lot about awareness and choice. So the awareness for is the first thing. The other thing I'd say is the more I study psychology, the more it ends up in philosophy. In the same way as anyone who studies physics ends up in mathematics, anyone who studies cookery ends up in chemistry, maybe, I don't know, right? But anyone who studies psychology, like us, who's coaching and working with trauma and the things we work with, pretty soon we find out that there's like a philosophical substructure to everyone's, say, view of the body or whatever it is. People still digesting this? Need a breath? Need a movement? It can all get a bit heady, huh? So let's go through some of the philosophers of the body. Do we want to begin with the sort of the disembodiment, like some of the Greeks saying, body and soul is a separate thing, they have nothing to do with each other? There is a sort of disembodied philosophy in Western culture, and there's also some of the other Greeks who are saying, actually, these are two sides of the same coin. Or do we go with the Christian philosophers who said, no, 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 body and soul, two separate things? Or do we go further back? Where do you want to start on like philosophers of the body?
Well, if we start to talk about disembodiment or philosophy for disembodiment, I'd say that definitely we should start from ancient Greeks. And the main idea of this is, as we call it, the body as object. So, and in fact, it's a great idea. And in fact, most part of the time, I think we experience that idea and we do that idea in our life. Like, for example, when you go to the doctor, they're not too much interested in what kind of person you are or what is your soul movements or something like
Right.
that.
Like if you've broken your arm or something, right? Like, because there's lots of areas of health that holism is very relevant to. Like if I have a stomach problem, it could be trauma or emotions. But if I just fell off a bike and broke my tibia, right? Or the same in the gym, right? If I'm just doing pull-ups, working on my biceps, just a little, there we go. Yeah. By the way, Plato used to regularly win philosophical arguments by flexing. Plato was a wrestler. And the original Greek gymnasia had philosophy and exercise in the same place, right? So there was a sort of two Greek traditions, a more holistic one and a more separate one. But as you say, even as embodiment people, it's not bad to view the body as an object sometimes, right? That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and it has a great roots because people start to explore dead, not moving bodies, to explore the how we work, and I really appreciate this. So body.
Anatomy and things like this was really a great leap forward, right? Like the anatomy, there was a point in history when the church said you can't do anatomy. And then the church said, you know what, the body is for science, the soul is for the church. We kind of agreed to kind of divide the territory, like the Portuguese or Spanish or whatever. And that division meant that people could do anatomy for the first time. And it's interesting, actually, we have this idea as body as machine, but the idea of a machine wasn't around in the past. The Greeks just had one play about a robot. So it's one play. And they kind of got the idea, but then it was forgotten. People sort of forgot about that idea. So even saying the body is a machine, that's a kind of modern idea, right? That's not a given.
Yeah, it's idea from 16th, 17th century, and pretty much people, in fact, try to blame Descartes for bringing that idea of bodies, object bodies.
He is French, though, so blaming the French is a strong tradition. He does get kind of a hard name, doesn't he? He kind of gets a hard time, like pretentious people like say, oh, it's from Descartes, it's the body mind split, and I mean, you'll still hear that when people say, I'm a man in a woman's body. Maybe we'll come to that later. You'll still hear that idea of like the body and mind are separate, right? But it's sort of Descartes was more holistic than people give him credit for if you actually read him.
Yeah, I just want to mention that the problem with Descartes was that, in fact, his book was published just maybe several months after this Galilei and case.
Right. He had a gun to his head, right?
Yeah. And in fact, his publisher put only the part without any idea of soul into real book, into published book. So anything about how impulses and nervous system works, great, but something more advanced, no.
There's a context, right? A context. It's like when people like I used to do interviews in Russia when I can't work there anymore, obviously, because of my Ukraine work, and people would ask me, "What do you think of Mr. Putin?" And I'd say, "Well," and I'd give my answer, but there was a very definite context to that answer, and that's changed for me, for example. So and for you it might not. So let's be cautious with that. We're always doing philosophy in a social context, right? Like let's take up the trans issue. So if we're talking about body mind, that's hugely political now, right? If you say, hey, body and mind are separate, so you can be a mind in a body. I'm a turnip in the body of an Apache, whatever woman, Apache helicopter, whatever. Like that's a political statement. And if I were to say that's not possible, I mean, I could draw a huge amount of heat, right? I'm probably not going to be, burned to the stake or whatever, or house arrest like Galileo, but there's certainly a political consequence to this day of the body-mind conversation. Yep. It's okay. You grew up in communism. You know how to keep your mouth shut. So let's go back to the Greeks. So we have sort of two movements within Greek philosophy: body-mind split, body-mind holism. All the positions of sort of body-mind would be included amongst Greek philosophers. There's a whole plethora of them. But the Greeks definitely had this idea of developing the self through the body. So they had these two words, sarx and soma. Soma like somatics, the body in its lived cultural, spiritual wholeness, and sarx like piece of meat. And in a way, this was the beginning of the somatics movement, the embodiment movement. And you can be in the gym working on your muscles as an object. You can be in the gym working on your boundaries through the bench press, your way of being. And these two orientations have existed since the Greeks. Hence, they had two different words for body, right? Anything you want to add about sort of early philosophers? I mean, obviously, sort of Asian traditions, again, it might be more commonsensical, the idea of working on oneself through the body, and kind of, the idea of Aikido or Jiu-Jitsu. Jiu-Jitsu was originally Jiu-Jitsu Do, Kendo, saying that they even had a Do meaning path or way for flower arranging, for other things that weren't bodily. But that's I've studied, for example, in Japan, and it's a very commonsensical idea that you would develop yourself through the body. I think an ancient Greek and a modern Japanese school teacher would understand each other pretty well, though through the study of the classics, that was also in a lot of sports, like a lot of sort of, obviously the British invented all the real sports, your footballs, your rugbies, your crickets, your things like that. And they were all done as character development originally. So the sort of the British officer class who did the sports had a classical Greek education. So the idea of developing the self through the body was also in kind of British public school system. And cold showers have been done at Gordonstone, which is where King Charles went, the school in Scotland, way before Wim Hof was doing them. So there's this sort of, there's various traditions through the culture of developing the self through the body. But I think philosophically, was it Heidegger who said, you do not have a body, you are bodily. So it really only re-emerged in Western philosophy with, would you say, Heidegger followed by Nietzsche, who really articulated in Zarathustra, thus spoke Zarathustra, excuse the pronunciation. He says, I am body, I am self, right? And obviously Nietzsche studied under Heidegger. So would you say that's the re-emergence of sort of body in philosophy in the West?
Yeah, I think it was started mostly from Heidegger, and the whole tradition of phenomenology in philosophy. When they try to understand how people think and how people became conscious and how they even be aware of a reality or understand something outside the brain. Uh, this tradition that, I should say, uh, we get some information, we understand something, we create understanding, conscious understanding through our personal experience.
The subjective side, right? This is the
Subjective
turn
side.
towards postmodern, that the subject, not just the body as object, but the body as subject. So this is Heidegger, Husserl, Nietzsche, Monty, Merleau-Ponty. Fuck, my pronunciation's awful. Should we try this between us?
Merleau-Ponty.
Merleau-Ponty, another Frenchman. Okay, so these are the sort of phenomenologists, right? The more like subjective sense of the body.
Yeah, and Merleau-Ponty was maybe the main person in this tradition who was mostly focused on embodiment itself, on this subjective perception, subjective experiencing of reality, and he discussed how we can construct the understanding of reality of the world around through our subjective experience. And I guess that in fact he was the first embodiment person.
Merleau-Ponty,
Probably
you
he
think
was
so?
French.
No, Nietzsche before him. Nietzsche predates him, surely. My boy Nietzsche coming at you. It's got to be. He was the first bro weightlifting body teacher, surely, of Western philosophy. Which maybe someone can Google it. Who came first? I think it was Nietzsche. I think he came first because like, he's solidly embodied. And I think Heidegger kind of hinted at it, but Nietzsche was the first one who really got it. I mean, obviously, some people don't like the associations with Nietzsche because he's got his sister was actually a Nazi and kind of reinterpreted his stuff in this like she interpreted the Übermensch as the sort of superior Aryan, where actually Nietzsche was pretty down on racism. If you read his views, he certainly wouldn't have agreed with the Nazis' views on racial superiority. But his sister was a nasty piece of work and published him afterwards. But I've been obviously everyone reads Nietzsche as a moody teenager. That's mandatory. If you missed that phrase of wearing black and reading Nietzsche, I highly recommend it. Billy's still wearing black, but she's not moody. And I'm still moody, but not wearing black. But I reread him recently, or I re-YouTubed him because there's all these cool young YouTubers who are super into Nietzsche who lift weights, and it's surprisingly deep actually. Like reading it, having had a career in embodiment since the last time I read it, I was pretty impressed. There's a lot there. But you think Merleau-Ponty? We'll go German versus French, which is the usual philosophical war, right? So Nietzsche, yeah, 900. Merleau-Ponty. We're getting the dates up now. It's difficult to get confused. You want to bring some Dostoevsky in as well? Get Russian on my ass. We're waiting for the verdict to come.
No, Dostoevsky was pretty disembodied person himself, and in fact, Russians didn't care too much about embodiment or subjective experience or something like that. Maybe particularly because of Orthodox tradition in church. Uh, um, yeah, and I think it was the most important part.
Right. So in some way, we could bring in Ken Wilber, who's probably America's greatest living philosopher. Though I'd say Canada's is John Vervaeke, not Jordan Peterson. Sorry, Jordan, but John Vervaeke, who's a very much an embodied philosopher who does Tai Chi and meditation, and he's a master at sort of practices like we are, looking at how practices. He calls them ecologies of practice. But Ken Wilber is sort of developmental psychologist as well as American philosopher, and he talks about sort of development, right? So in sort of we could look at the body through this journey of kind of traditionalism, which is various philosophers of traditionalism look at the body often as something to be controlled, like a dangerous thing, Like you made this can feel old-fashioned, like the body is sinful, certain Christian philosophers. Or Greeks also had this, and there's something in this, right? Like I'm on a diet at the moment, and it's a bit of a war sometimes, like, yes, I'm listening to my body, blah, blah, blah. But there's also like a degree of control, right? And that's a Greek idea and Christian idea. And I think not to be totally, as someone who's a sort of sober ex-drug addict, that's not to be totally rejected as a philosophy. And then we have the modernist idea of the body as a machine and an object. And we talked to the pros of that earlier, but there's also the cons of that. Like if you see most gyms, they view the body as a machine and people aren't really there as human beings, and it's dehumanizing. There's potentially, as someone who understands the evils of sort of communism, for example, like the idea of the body just as an object, as a piece of meat. Stalin very much, I think, had that philosophy of just sort of throw more boys at the guns kind of thing. World War One maybe is an embodiment of that philosophy that the body is just an object, mass slaughter of people, industrialization, the lack of community, the lack of environmental connection. And then we get into the postmodernity, which you mentioned with Merleau-Ponty, really starting in the 60s in any big way, of the importance of the subjective, and then that really coming to its apex, I'd say very recently, the idea of I am whatever I think I am, which is a mixture of sort of body-mind split and postmodern liberal hyper-individualism that is only the individual. There's no community or traditional structure or nation or whatever, with this very strong subjective element. Like I am a woman because I feel I am, and that's enough. That is it. The objective is out the window, which was modernity's big thing. It's just objectivity, right? So I now go, okay, what's the integral move, which is the balance of the subjective and the objective? Thoughts?
I'd add one more name, which is, I guess, necessary if we even start to talk about philosophy and the body, and is the name of, Michel Foucault.
Blah, blah. Sorry, it's French postmodernist. I'm having a reaction. My inner Jordan Peterson's coming out. Come on, I'll shut up for 1 minute. Say something nice about this diabolical pervert.
Okay. First of all, he's the person who describe, in some way explain how society make different discipline nomin for any type of the body. So how culture and politics rule the body. So, and in fact, it's very important point, not because of postmodernism, or not because of some useful understanding, in fact, why schools look like that, like jails look like that, why hospitals, sorry for Sarah. And it's really interesting and useful. And if you never heard, and if you're interested, please have a look for this.
He brought in power as a major issue, right? Which it tends to be overdone in the kind of woke movement, but it's something worth looking at, right? The body.
Yes. And it's important to understand these roots when we meet new ideas and new ideas around the body. Because this idea that there's some superpower and some bad people who have a strong intention to oppress you, these ideas particularly came from these books and this movement. So it's not just in the air or some from.
No, what we now call woke is a fruition of Marxism taking root through French intellectuals, and it stresses oppressed and oppressive groups, critical studies more broadly, yeah. So, and it tends to view the world through the lens of power, and it tends to view the body as either being oppressed or oppressed. So, but we could break that down, right? Like you're Jewish and woman and Russian. right? But you're still white, according to the sort of American version of this, despite those things, right? And our gay friends there in Moscow again, you know, like different again. So yeah, this modern obsession with power and what is essentially Marxism, you know, viewing the body through that lens of oppression, which I think is a good lens, just to be clear. I think it's a lens, but if it's the only lens, something is lost. I think it can be a very good lens to see things through. Like, let's take my Irishness. There's a way in which, you know, 600 years or 800 years of British colonization, violence, oppression leaves a mark on my body. It leaves a mark on how I eat, right? We can talk about Jewish feeding as well. I've got an Italian girlfriend at the moment, you know. So there's all sorts of cultural issues around food, how that impacts the body. It leaves a mark on how I relate to authority through the body. Yeah, I mean, as teachers, all of you will experience kickback from groups of people who have been oppressed, and that's in their body. And then we can get into the narrative of intergenerational healing and trauma. I was just doing a coaching session with a woman from Bosnia, and we're doing a thing on boundaries, right? And it was a very nice piece of work using embodied work on boundaries, classic coaching stuff. And then all of a sudden, it just got really heavy. And then we went, because I'm in the Balkans now, and I went, oh, fuck. And we were doing collective trauma for a, you know, a generation of women who were violated that had nothing to do with her as an individual. I was like, oh shit, now we're in the kind of like Thomas Hübl character territory, spiritual teacher, maybe philosopher, of like working with the collective body. And it was rough. And certainly, you know, work in Ukraine, work at Ireland, many places I've been to, this is just part of the body, right? It's collective as well as individual. Everyone's still breathing, talking about some pretty harsh things. So take a breath, take a stretch, people. If you're watching this at home, we can't. Born in Bosnia, you're welcome. Okay, yeah, yeah. She really liked her vibes. Very interesting cultural embodiment. I don't think philosophers have talked enough about cultural embodiment. We're kind of obsessed with it, aren't we? We've got a session on that on Thursday. But yeah, cultural embodiment's one of our niche areas. Would you say, Julia? Like, unlike some of the Americans. So.
It's not easy to talk about cultural embodiment when you have pretty pale skin. No, that's that's true. And in fact, when I did my presentation about cultural embodiment on the Embodiment Conference, it was maybe the first time when I feel this need to create some narrative, some story using my Jewishness. I never used it before.
Well, but in the USSR, you wouldn't want to admit you were Jewish too much, right? Because it was pretty anti-Semitic.
Yeah, but yeah, and I think that this cultural part of embodiment, which definitely exists, which is very useful to understand and very important to be aware, because this is our advantages and disadvantages. This is our power and this is our vulnerability. And but what I can see now from as I say, cultural studies, philosophical studies, or sociology, these disciplines still have no language or clear language to understand, to even describe.
The only language they had in philosophy was a sort of borderline or actually racist language of like groups of people, or you know,
Yeah,
German people or something like that. And it's like that went, you know, rightly so out of fashion that people are left with very little to describe cultural embodiment. And it is a thing, right? Like, as people who have worked internationally a lot, you know, like you've worked in England and you've worked in Tel Aviv, pretty fucking different, right?
definitely. And so still there's no language, or clear language. And also right now we have this unstable situation when from one side we have this identity theory where it's not important who I am as a person. It's important what identity, collective identity I have.
Right, so a strong sense of collective identity on the one hand, right? Like I am Jewish, I'm a woman, I am this, I am that, I'm black, I'm gay. And on the other hand, a hyper individualism, right?
Yeah, and like a strong need. You have to define yourself.
People say it in discussions now. They say, well, as a black woman before they speak. Like they're announcing their identity as an authority claim before any kind of logical argument.
Yeah.
We have this new phrase, lived experience, as opposed to dead experience, right? That's a postmodern term right there. My lived experience trumps everything you have to say. That's a primacy of the subjective over the objective. And then we have the sort of modernists pushing back, the Shapiros and people like facts don't care about your feelings. That's like modernism pushing back on postmodernism, right?
And at the same time, I feel it's a little bit dangerous, in fact, because if we continue to do such things like, okay, Mark, you are UK colonialist. I don't know, Israeli colonialist. Okay. in good.
It dehumanizes people. It takes out the complexity that you're Jewish and I have an Irish family, and we both have political beliefs of certain alignments and life experiences. And you came there as a refugee to Israel, and like there's a whole complexity that's taken out as soon as we make the group experience primacy. I mean, my sense philosophically is we need to include the individual, the collective, and the transpersonal. So on the sort of spiritual level, we're all one, right? That's a truth of all mystics through the body everywhere. On the individual level, I'm Mark Walsh and I'm a unique individual, which liberalism stresses very highly, liberalism being the main philosophy of the West, essentially, less so in Russia. And collectivism, which could be wokeism, communism, fascism is also collectivist, right? Like we're the great Aryans, you're not. Collectivism has some truth in it. Like I do have an ethnicity, right? It might be complex, like I'm Anglo-Irish and I married a Ukrainian and now I'm in Slovenia, but like there is such a thing as a group identity. And what I find is people disembody one of those levels, either the transpersonal, the individual, or the collective. And very few people can handle going, I'm God and everything and all of you, and I'm me, and I'm also a man or whatever. Yeah? So that's a big ask, actually, right?
And for me, it's in fact important question: what will happen with the whole, let's say, the whole industry or the whole professional field, like psychotherapists, embodied practices, etc., etc., who are more focused on subjectivity, subjective experience, and this individual experience, not only identity stuff. So for me, it's a real question now.
So there's a real question professionally, how we work, whether we just look for individual solutions or collective solutions or transpersonal solutions, right? Like if someone's depressed, what's the solution? Yeah. Also, this really impacts, these philosophical things really impact uh, ethical discussions. Let's take vaccination. Is your bodily integrity a moral principle? Like in the West, that's key. A bit less so in Russia, a lot less in China. That my body is my choice, right? You'll hear my body, my choice. The edge of my body is where your ethics stop and mine begin. Your ethics are out there. Anything in here is my ethics. And abortion is always such a thorny issue because is it your body or not? Well, yes and no, right? It's your body, it's not your body, it's another body in your body. So that's like if we're having this key body ethical principle as bodily integrity as a key thing. You could do anything the fuck you want outside of me. If you want to like take my liver or kill me or rape me, like that's not okay. I have consent over my body. So these bodily ethics are really, really key. They're really, really key to just how we live. One more group of philosophers maybe to bring in before we open up to Q&A. And as I said, for anyone watching on YouTube, I'll get to questions in the comments as well. The political philosophers, like, do we view human nature, the body, as fundamentally good, the noble savage. You'll still see this in sort of the idealization of the hippie movement. Will have this very much like hippies, very much like the body is good, the body never lies, you know. Rousseau, the French, another Frenchie, kind of very much had that, or Hobbes. The body is like, you know, nature, tooth and claw, Darwin, dangerous, you know, the body has to be watched. And it's in weightlifting, it's like the body is evil and must be punished. You know, you'll see that in gyms, you know. And in hippie 5 rhythms, it's like you got to just express the body and let out the body. And this is essentially sort of liberalism and fascism, right? There's like 2 political philosophies attached, or we could say left and right politically. So whatever your philosophy of the nature of the body is also pretty fucking important to what you do. You know, how you educate children, for example, it's going to be very different if you have a Hobbesian versus a Rousseauian view of nature. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a question regarding Dobbs. It's a question how you think about people. How do you think about human being? Do you think they're initially good, were initially good, and something later something can happen, or were initially terrible? Because
do we need training? So do we need education and training, or do we need to just strip away the layers of society to reveal our Buddha nature or our innate goodness or the, you know, the inner God within, or whatever framework you have, right?
yeah.
So as teachers, as coaches, this is an important question. Yeah. And traditionally this has been left and right wing. Though it's also embodiment terms. Some people are just more like their embodiment is something like control. We might say like earthy in one of our models, right? Or fiery. And some people like more water and airy is more like freedom. They want to, I just want to be, just want to let it all out, you know, I want to get naked. And that was the hippie movement, right? By the way, the hippie movement is coming back to the philosophy of the Germans again. Germans over the French every day. They had, so there was a movement in Germany called the Romantics. Maybe you've heard of, you know, romantic poets like Wordsworth. But the Romantics really had that view, and the original hippies were called the Wandervogel, and they were Germans who got naked and did free love in the forests of Bavaria and stuff. And then eventually, a lot of them emigrated to California. So that's this philosophical trends will continue. And we could talk about sort of philosophical psychologists like Freud and Jung as well. Obviously, you know, Jung is a big, I'd say, a philosopher as much as a psychologist. People listening, what is there any philosophers you think we really missed out? Obviously, there's endless names and lists, but trying to remember that slideshow you used to give years ago, Vilya, with the different philosophers. Is there any on there we haven't mentioned yet? What I think's key to embodiment would be like virtue ethics, something like Aristotle, like the idea that we build virtue through the body, which again, the Japanese and the Koreans and the Chinese would understand intuitively. Yeah, there's probably a bunch of Indian philosophers who had a very bunch of interesting things to say. The Buddha we could include as a philosopher, right? Who's remarkably conservative in many ways. Yeah, different view of the body than the hippies for sure. There's actually sometimes a clash in kind of hippie events between the pagans and the Buddhists because they have different implicit philosophies of the body. Yeah, I mean Indian philosophy generally, right? But, we'll use Buddha as a placeholder. I think what the Indians came up with that the Greeks tried to but didn't quite, and the West didn't until people like Vervaeke and Wilbur, who integrated Eastern ideas, was the idea of practice. Like the Indians invented yoga. They said, hey, it's not enough just to sit and think about things. I mean, the Greeks kind of had it in their gymnasia a little bit. But this idea that we develop through practice, so philosophy can be embodied in that way. The Indians really had that, and from India spread to China, Korea, Japan. You know, as I said, it's now an implicitly obvious idea to a Japanese school teacher. But yeah, that's one of the things I think we get from India. Good, good, good. Take another breath. It's interesting, right? Like you read books on philosophy, they're not asking what's the body that's reading this. Like in our courses, we talk about trolls of learning, right? Like there's embodiments like curiosity and openness, and there's other embodiments like resentment or cynicism or narcissism that are probably less helpful for learning. And almost all the philosophers write as if a neutral, blank embodiment was reading the book. Right? I mean, Descartes even, I think, did experiments where he tried to like block out his ears and eyes and tried to sort of ignore the body as much as possible. But then they don't imagine the body of the reader actually having an impact. People say, oh, but it's my brain, it's not my body. It's like, yeah, but the body is the brain, to use Amanda Blake's term. So there's no, like the ideas we're telling you, right? Let's say you go Rousseau or Hobbes. Your embodiment is going to be as much a part of your response to that as any thinking you do, because any thinking you do arises from your embodiment. I have my moments of free love and let it all hang out, and I have my moments of like, oh my god, the world needs fucking controlling. This is intensely insane. All right, a few random thoughts. So let's do some Q&A in the chat. Keep the questions short if you can. What questions do you have? And yes, Nietzsche definitely predated Merleau-Ponty. So I'm not going to let you have that one. I'm not going to let you have that one, Villiers. One for the Germans, not the French. You don't get many English people cheering on the German squad, but if they're fighting the French. There was Monty Python where they had the Greeks versus the German football team. Does anyone know the only philosopher to play for a national football team? That's soccer, if you're listening. Anyone know this one? He's actually related to my best friend James. He's French, but he played in goal for Algeria. Albert Camus. So Albert Camus was the goalkeeper of the Algerian national squad. This used to impress my friends at school much more than saying that he had a Nobel Prize for literature. So he's the only philosopher who did actually play in a national football team. There you go. Random fact for you. We didn't talk about the existentialists, the idea of choice, freedom, nausea, the nausea of being in a postmodern world and having to make choices. Questions. Someone's leaving for contact improv practice here. And, you know, we'd think about embodied practice like contact improv or the gym, right? And we'd say there's no philosophy involved. But there is, right? Or you do tango, Villiers, right? Or did a lot of tango. There is an implicit philosophy there. And there's also an implicit historical tradition. Like tango comes from not just Argentina, but doesn't it come from like immigrant culture in Argentina? And the men used to dance with each other. And there's like a whole kind of historical, philosophical thing going on. Okay, what role should my Buddhism play in my coaching? Identity-based practices don't align with my practice. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the first thing I'd say, Sarah, is you don't have to be a radical Marxist to be a good psychologist. This is something that's only happened in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, hardcore kind of Maoism has taken over trauma therapy, for example. And if that aligns with your politics, that's good news. But I'd say most of us aren't aligned with identifying at the level of the group primarily or certainly exclusively. So first of all, I just offer you some love for just saying, you don't have to go along with that if you don't want. And there's a lot of bullying in the Buddhist world to go along with it. West Coast Buddhism is super Marxist these days, a bit less East Coast in the States. I know you're in the States, Sarah. So I wouldn't say Buddhism should play a role, but what might it inform? For me, Buddhism informs my view of how we're conditioned by attachment and suffering. So how aversion and craving condition our bodies. So I wrote a post about this today. The body never lies, right? This nice kind of sweet idea. Well, actually, from a Buddhist point of view, the body is always lying because the body is always historically conditioned by craving and aversion. Craving and aversion, which means that, you've got a green t-shirt on today. Let's say someone in a green t-shirt abused me once. Well, I'd have an aversive response to you. It's nothing to do with you. It's not very wise at all. Yeah. So I think Buddhism would caution us to always listen to the wisdom of the body, but I think, it does exist. I think Buddhism also has a strong practice of two things. One is ethics, which isn't fashionable in the West. And I think Buddhism offers a system of ethics that secular Westerners can take hold of, which means that you can experience reality much clearer. So Buddhist ethics aren't really there to make you good. You're good to make you wise. They have a different kind of way around of looking at it. The other thing I'd say is just the importance of mindfulness, right? Like the importance of awareness training and how we can anchor awareness in the body. I do wonder how much that's changed since the Buddha's time in terms of the sort of techno environment we're in. But yeah, there's certainly some wisdom there. And I'd say any sort of embodiment teacher who doesn't practice mindfulness is missing a trick. Certainly even like gym bros, practice mindfulness. They call it mind-muscle connection. It's a thing, like in gym bros, right? Like Arnold Schwarzenegger's like, you've got to feel the pump. You have to feel inside the muscle. You know, it's mindfulness. So like, it's always reinvented because it's such a wonderful thing. Yeah. Okay, hope that helps a little bit, Sarah. And much love to you in the sort of political environment you're in. Yeah, it's interesting actually. Like philosophically, the Overton window of late stage capitalism is now very small, and there's not that much we can discuss actually. Yeah, in terms of like a really robust, wide, you know, everyone's very polarized and arguing, but in terms of like really like deep philosophy, I think people aren't discussing much. One reason I love philosophy is it gets past the censors. So on YouTube, you can study philosophy till the cows come home, and it's not politically censored by the sort of tech overlords in quite the same way. So I think it's also a bit fashionable again, which is cool. The kids are into philosophy, Vilja. It's kind of happened. We've got all these gym bros studying Nietzsche and different people. So maybe Jordan Peterson has a lot to answer for there, but I think he sort of opened up philosophical inquiry for a whole generation of young men, particularly, which I think is fabulous. The whole question of consciousness, just that, Mark. You just like us to solve the problem of consciousness in relation to philosophy. I'm not sure I dare give that a go. Vilja, consciousness, go. Over to you. No, fuck off. It's a big question, isn't it? Mark, do you want to be a bit more specific on that one? Like the whole question of consciousness. I mean, let's start here. It's a profound challenge to a modernist materialist worldview. So if everything is just stuff, what the hell is this? Right? Like, how does this, and this is coming up in AI. I know a very senior AI researcher at Google, DeepMind, and we have these arguments all the time. It's like he expects this, a thing, to suddenly produce this experience. By this, I mean the experience of Markness and me seeing you guys now, right? So it's like, how does that happen? So I think the consciousness, and now people are saying AI is conscious, so we should give it human rights. Fuck that, kill it now. Yeah, so smash it, call me John Connor, smash it to shit. All it's good at is impersonating consciousness, in my view. It's nothing fucking conscious about it. It can pass the Turing test, but only because it lies, right? It's learning how to pretend to be conscious, and then we're going to treat it like a fucking conscious human being. Smash it now. That's all I have to say about AI. I'm going to John Connor, Mountains of Slovenia, leading the rebel resistance, Vilja. I'm fucking ready. It's my Irish side coming out, isn't it? It's my Irish rebel side coming out. I can fucking feel it. Yeah. Anything on consciousness other than smash all the machines, Vilja?
In some sense, I follow Yuval Harari ideas.
Dirty globalist. Okay, continue. Johan Novel Harari. You mean Johan Novel Harari, the Israeli? What do you mean? No, not Johan Hari, the wonderful British journalist and friend of mine.
No. I talk about Israel and Harari, who's
Go for it.
historian, and I think he's a really clever guy and good thinker, a modern thinker. And I follow him an idea that, in fact, all this AI problem is, in fact, can be solved in some way. All these new relations, new relationships, and all these problems that we don't know with whom we talk, etc., etc., and maybe the option to generate some religious ideas and suggest it to people and somehow manipulate. But the alternative way is to dive into embodiment, in fact. So, and I think I like this idea, in fact, that in fact we can do something. We maybe we can crush this tech stuff, but maybe we can go deeper into inside and know about ourselves and do embodiment.
Nice, and there is this also this modern discussion of transhumanism. Can we upload to a cloud, which says that all we are is information? The idea that our embodiment is irrelevant. And sometimes you see these movies in the 90s where, Tom Hanks or Schwarzenegger will be like body swapped with someone, the kid would become an adult, whatever. But that's a ridiculous idea. I mean, let's just take hormone levels, right? If I injected Vilya with my level of testosterone, she would just want to kill and fuck everyone. Okay. And she would have no training to stop herself doing that. It would be a nightmare. There'd be a rampage on the streets of Tel Aviv tonight. And that's just one hormone. By the way, trans people say that some great YouTube, some people transitioning where you can learn a lot, get a lot of compassion actually about their transitioning from, that's just one thing. That's one testosterone, right? So it's like, the fact that our body is somehow not relevant and we can just upload, this weird information age view of humanity, that we're this abstract mind that can be moved to a machine. I find that very hard to understand that philosophy, though it seems to be, many of our tech overlords, that is their philosophy. That is their philosophy. That's what they want. They want transhumanism. They say the body is just a stage in the evolution, and our job is to sort of die and wither away like an umbilical cord, and the true humanity will be this supercomputer or whatever. So I'd also say maybe technology has underlined some of these questions of embodiment. I don't think for my Irish granddad on a fishing boat in the North Sea, these questions were so relevant, or some of the questions, some of the ethical questions would have. So maybe that's underlined. Someone's asked here, Ula's asked, do you sometimes get into philosophical discussions with your clients? Yes, because someone's behavior is underpinned by their beliefs and their embodiment, this combination, right? And you can go in one through the other. So if someone believes that the body is evil and dirty, how are they going to act in the gym? How is their sex life going to be, right? How is their marriage going to be? So we might have to get into the deep beliefs of what a body is to them, so we can actually, they're like, hey, I really want to, treat my body with more respect, but their view of the body is dirty, disgusting, and sinful. Well, we're going to have to get a bit philosophical, right? If we're going to really uproot the problem rather than just work on the surface. Julia, is that something you come across? Do you ever get philosophical? I mean, obviously with Russian clients, you have to get philosophical. So Israeli clients, you're going to be in philosophical arguments. So
from time to time, yes, because some judgments, some ideas, some let's say thoughts that rules patterns, that rules embodiment. They have the roots, and we can explore these roots. And sometimes I can say, oh, your idea, or I understand it. It's from the end here, and it could be useful.
Nice. Jeremiah has brought Hegel into the equation, the dialectic. AI can help us make a distinguishment of tech and humans. Who are we? Yeah. Here's a good question for anyone. If you're a PT or a coach or whatever listening to this, what can you do that AI can't? Because I said this to my doctor friend. I said, hey, John, you do know you're going to be unemployed in 5 years. Well, don't be ridiculous. I'm a doctor at Cambridge University Teaching Hospital. I said, John, let's call him, actually his name's Rob. I'll just call him Rob, that's his name. I said, Rob, what do you think you do? He said, well, I help people, I'm a doctor. I said, yeah, but you basically give information out, right? He said, yeah, I'm not a nurse. I don't inject anyone. I don't really hardly touch anyone. I just give out the best information, listen to their symptoms and I give the best information. I'm like, yeah, ChatGPT can do that. Yeah. And there may be some legal barriers and blah, blah. I said, unless you're loving people and caring for them and touching them, maybe massaging them, you've got no job in 5 years, man. You just wasted a huge fucking education at Cambridge. And he was shocked by that. He tried to sort of say, but no, people have always arrogantly said won't be unemployed by technology throughout the years. And, nurses might still be needed because of the human touch, right? But a cold ass consultant who's just given, actually, he's a lovely guy, but, if you imagine a really cold consultant who just gives information, same for the coaches, same for the PTs. Mike Israel's got a great fucking app, probably better than most PTs on how to work out information. Yeah. So I'm not under commission, by the way, Mike, but if you are out there, I would like some of that Jew money. Okay. Just give me 10% for the app sales. That'll be great. So if you can't do something an app or a ChatGPT can't do, then you've got no job. Right. So this differentiation between us and the tech is maybe a kind of not just an opportunity, but this is maybe a necessity financially. Yeah. last group of people then, as we close, to mention 99, the philosophy of 99% of your ancestors was none of these philosophies. So the philosophy of 99.9% of your ancestors was animism. So the idea that your body is alive, your body is part of the mythology of the landscape, it's part of the tribe, the body is immersed in mythology and landscape and group belonging. The body has a mythology and a poetry to it. Like that was the embodied philosophy of most of our ancestors. I think that's pretty interesting, right? Like even if we start with the Greeks, we're starting with the last, what, 3%, 2% of human history, yeah, of human existence, not history. So, you know, everything we've said here, kind of, there's a sort of bigger body of work called evolution, and the philosophy that went with that in Paleolithic times, which is most of our times, was a deeply embodied philosophy. So, Philia, any closing notes?
No. Sometimes I really dive deep into texts and ideas and enjoy them and apply them. But mostly when I listen to YouTube or talking with clever people, real philosopher, I think like, okay, what about personal experience? What about embodiment experience? What
Right.
about practice something? What what about this? What about
Right,
philosophy?
right. It can get too intellectual, right? It's
Yeah.
like that's why I like John Vervaeke, for example, because he meditates, he does Tai Chi, you know, runs around the woods. There's a lived practice there that's it's got to be part of it. Yeah. Okay, so we'll finish with a vote. So who are the best philosophers? Greek, French, or German? Okay, Greek, French, or German. Let's vote in the chat. These are the only options, really. I'd like to think the English and the Russians are involved, but I don't think so. Vinny's going to say they're all fucking Jewish anyway, so it's all a conspiracy. Her and Noble Harari. Sorry, it's my inner Nietzsche sister coming out. Terribly sorry, Vinny. Love you, darling. So yeah, let's vote in the chat. We're going to go Greek, German, or French. They're the 3 options. Let's see what people come up with. This is the cuisine we're eating tonight. You're Indian too, actually. Let's give the Indians some love. Get the Indians some love. Mm. This is more like a sort of embodied history of Western philosophy we're really doing, right? Virginia, who does our customer service, everything I do, she says the Greeks thought that first, and then she gives me a Greek word for it. So I think Greek seems to be a bit of Greek love. Who doesn't love a bit of Greek love? We've got 1 vote for German, but that's by someone that has an umlaut above their name. So he's clearly just voting for his own team. Someone's choosing Indian. They have the best food. I mean, Greek food is good. German food's not up there. So we're going to judge philosophies based on the cuisine. So yeah, Greek, Indian, Rudolf Steiner, you're going to sneak a German in there. Okay, fair enough. All right, everyone take a breath. Let's finish with a breath. This is embodied philosophy. Comments, do add your questions in the comments. Those who are watching on YouTube, I'll address them. Dorogoya. Spasiba. Wonderful to see you again. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our rantings.